Greetings, Poké fans! Michael here. Today's video is the newest installment of my Pokemon Types Then vs. Now series, where I go over the history and changes that a certain Pokemon type has gone through over the course of the main series games. And this video is about the Ghost type. But before I get into that, look! It's a little me! This is the first plushie I've ever sold, but it's only on sale for a very limited time, starting on the day this video comes out, which should be February 25th, until the end of the day on March 6th. And you're gonna wanna get it because it's been scientifically proven that if you've got a little me next to you giving you support during a Pokemon battle, then it's impossible to lose. Come on, guys. Scientifically proven. You can pick one up for a very limited time using the link in the description below, so make sure you do that quickly. But enough of me, let's talk about the Ghost type. Don't worry, he's okay. It's very well made plushie. The Ghost type is one of the strangest types I've covered in my Types Then vs. Now series, and I'm excited to show you guys how it's really changed a lot more than I think people realize. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, pretty please. Thank you. And let's dive in to Ghost type Pokemon Then vs. Now. We'll start with Generation 1, Red, Blue, and Yellow. And in the story of those games, Ghost type Pokemon, and just ghosts in general, actually had a pretty big role, being a big part of the story segment around Lavender Town. However, despite that place of prominence, Ghost type Pokemon were barely there. And I don't just mean in a metaphysical sense. The only three Ghost type moves were Confuse Ray, which was a status move that just confused the target, Lick, which only had 30 power but could paralyze, and Nightshade, which did damage equal to the user's level. All Ghost attacks were physical, but that only really impacted Lick. Confuse Ray is obviously not an attack, and Nightshade just did its set HP amount of damage every time, regardless of the user's attacking stat. Also, an interesting note about Nightshade is that it could be used against Pokemon that would normally be immune to it. So you could hit a normal type move with Nightshade in Gen 1, which is a little odd. The only Ghost type Pokemon in all of Gen 1 were Ghastly, Haunter, and Gengar. And they were also Poison type, meaning they were vulnerable to the Psychic types they were supposed to be good against. Emphasis on supposed to be. Nowadays, we all know Ghost type moves to be strong against Psychic type Pokemon. But in Gen 1, the Ghost type moves did nothing to Psychic type Pokemon. Nothing! They were immune! And you know what makes this kind of worse? Is that it wasn't on purpose. An NPC in the Saffron Gym in Red and Blue says that Psychic types only fear bugs and ghosts, implying that Ghost was supposed to be super effective against Psychic types, but ended up not being. This line is not present in the later released Yellow version, which leads me to believe that this was an accident. It was a mistake in the coding, and then they removed that line in Yellow to kind of retcon and take a step back on their mistake. This is why Psychic type Pokemon were so incredibly overpowered in Gen 1. They had two supposed weaknesses, but the Bug type was hopelessly weak, and the Ghost type weakness wasn't actually a weakness. Here is the full type chart for the Ghost type in Gen 1. The only type they dealt super effective damage to was themselves, and they could not touch normal types, in addition to the Psychic type that we already discussed. On the defensive side, they resisted Bug and Poison, two types which weren't very good attacking types anyways, but they also only had one weakness, themselves, and had two immunities to fighting and normal. The Ghost type still has those immunities to this day and is actually the only type that has two immunities. All the other ones have either 0 or 1. Although, interestingly, in Gen 1, normal and fighting moves that did a set HP amount of damage, like Bide, Super Fang, Sonic Boom, or Seismic Toss, could still hurt Ghost type Pokemon, much like how Nightshade could in the reverse direction. But back to the type chart, I should mention that the defensive side of it is a bit misleading, since there were no pure Ghost type Pokemon in Gen 1. Instead, let's look at Gengar's type matchup chart, which currently is the same as it was in Gen 1 if you remove the Fairy type. This is actually how Ghost types took damage in Gen 1. However, this is not how Gengar took damage throughout all of the generations, since in Gen 3 it got Levitate, and then lost it in Gen 7. Gengar's been on a wild ride. We'll talk more about that. As for the Gen 1 Ghost Specialist, it was Agatha, who I still think is more of a poison specialist than a ghost specialist. While ghosts make up more than half of her party, her entire team is made up of poison types. So in summation, the ghost type was pretty much garbage in Generation 1. They could only deal super effective damage to themselves, and remember, it was an extremely sparse type. So a Gengar was only good against another Gengar, which was also weak to a Gengar. The Gengar line's defensive benefits of having 2 immunities is pretty offset by it having 4 total weaknesses. So while it might have success in the competitive scene of Gen 1, it's not using any ghost type moves. Ghost type Pokemon tended to be more useful for being annoying, like Agatha's that have movesets with Hypnosis, Dream Eater, and Confuse Ray. And heck, of those 3 moves, 2 of them aren't even ghost type moves. Then came Generation 2, which overall helped the ghost type, but it wasn't all positives. This became the new type chart, and there were 3 big changes. The first is that Ghost is now super effective against Psychic, as it was originally intended to be. This was a boost for Ghost, but the 2 new types were less kind. The new Steel type resisted Ghost, and the new Dark type both resisted Ghost and did super effective damage against it. This type chart is almost identical to the one in place today, with the only later change being a relatively minor one. This put Ghost in a weird role of being tough to hit, having 2 immunities and only 2 weaknesses, but not being that great at hitting back, only being super effective against 2 types, however, not resisted by that many types. It was getting less gimmicky, but still just kind of weird. So Gen 2 made ghost types a bit more useful in regards to the type chart, but practically not much changed. Despite only having 1 line of ghost types in Generation 1, Gen 2 only added 1 new ghost type, that being Mischievous, a Pokemon that is so weak, they had to give it an evolution 2 generations later. There were several new ghost moves added, but all but 1 were status moves. Curse, which is a ghost move now, but was a question type move prior to Gen 5, harms the user to inflict a recurring damage curse on the target. If you've fought against ghost types in playthroughs, they've probably used this. Destiny Bond, Spite, and Nightmare are all situational gimmicky moves, and then there's Shadow Ball, a slightly weaker ghost type version of the move Psychic. Shadow Ball is a very solid move that is still in use today. But back in Gen 2 and Gen 3, it had a big problem. It was a physical attack. Remember, all ghost moves were physical prior to the physical special split in Gen 4, but both Gengar and Mischievous, the only 2 fully evolved ghost types, have higher special attack than physical attack, meaning they could not take advantage of their ghost type stab. Also, Shadow Ball has always had a chance to drop the target's special defense, despite being a physical move in Gens 2 and 3. It didn't have a chance to drop defense and then switched when it became a special move. No, it always dropped special defense, despite being a physical move? What? Side note, I still don't understand why Ghost was ever a wholly physical type. Sure, the one regular attack it had in Gen 1 was Lick, which is definitely a physical contact move, but it also had Nightshade, which is sending energy from a distance. That's special. In general, ghosts have to do with wisps in the wind and spirits and shadows and generally magic type special like things that are very much not physical. You know what? Ghost definitely should have been a special type from the start, because the whole thing about ghosts is that they're lacking one thing in particular: physical bodies. The ghost specialist of Gen 2 was Morty, who still just used a whole team of the Gengar line, oddly not using Mischievous at all, despite it being a new Gen 2 ghost type. Also an odd tidbit, in Gens 2 and 3, ghost types were immune to glare. But just those generations. The status of the ghost type in Gen 2 was better than Gen 1, but still not as good as it could be. the roster was still extremely limited, and it became, honestly, more of a gimmicky type with all of the gimmicky ghost moves they added. Then Gen 3 came along and didn't change a whole lot, but it did go a long ways toward filling out the roster. The new fully evolved ghost types added were Shedinja, Sableye, Banette, and Dusclops. While Shedinja and Sableye are pretty underwhelming due to Sableye having a low base stat total and Shedinja only having 1 HP, Banette and Dusclops were more respectably powerful. Both of them actually had higher physical attack than special, and therefore could properly take advantage of Shadow Ball. The new ghost moves added were not impressive. Astonish was weak, Grudge was too gimmicky, and Shadow Punch was okay, but still not as good as Shadow Ball. The ghost specialist in Gen 3 was Phoebe, the Elite Four member. She still had to use 2 Banette and 2 Dusclops since Gengar and Mischievous were not in the Hoendex. Plus the devs were too big a cowards to give her a Shedinja. But at least she had more variety in actual ghost type Pokemon than Agatha or Morty. So Gen 3 overall added more to the roster of ghost type Pokemon, but didn't have a huge impact on it. Then Gen 4 came along with the physical special split, which was a game changer for special attacking ghost type Pokemon, specifically Gengar. It was an effective Pokemon before being able to get special stab for its 2 types, Ghost and Poison, but now that Shadow Ball and Sludge Bomb were special moves, it could wreak havoc. This change dramatically cut down on physical ghost type attack options though. The best one left being Shadow Punch, which as I mentioned is pretty underwhelming in the power department. Therefore, most of the ghost type moves added in Gen 4 are physical attacks, since the special attacking ghost types could pretty much just rely on Shadow Ball. Shadow Claw became the new de facto physical ghost move, being weaker than Shadow Ball but having a higher crit chance. Shadow Sneak allowed for priority, which many slow ghosts definitely appreciated. Shadow Force is Giratina's signature move, and Ominous Wind was the ghost-type version of Ancient Power, often used as a transitional move for special attacking ghost types before they could learn Shadow Ball. The new ghost-type Pokemon added were overall pretty strong. I don't think many of them had massive impacts on the competitive scene, but they had pretty solid base stat totals. The fully evolved ones were Drifblim, Mismagius, Spiritomb, Dusknoir, Frostlass, Rotom, and Giratina. Giratina being the first ghost-type legendary Pokemon. Rotom is not legendary, don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Of these, Rotom would go on to make the biggest competitive impact, but that was once its other forms were changed to having their secondary typing be the one that matched their appliances. In Gen 4, all of Rotom's other forms stayed Electric Ghost, but then in Gen 5, they made it so that their ghost type changed to the type of the move that they got in that new appliance form. So Rotom Wash, for example, was Electric Ghost in Gen 4, but since Gen 5, it's Electric Water. However, aside from Rotom, the Pokemon that probably made the biggest impact on competitive was Dusknoir. Not because Dusknoir is great, it's actually not that great despite its large base stat total. Its existence made it so Dusclops was not a fully evolved Pokemon anymore, which means that when the Eviolite was added in Gen 5, Dusclops could take advantage of it, turning it into a basically unkillable wall. The Ghost-type specialist was Fantina, the 5th gym leader in Diamond and Pearl and the 3rd gym leader in Platinum. Then came Generation 5, which helped the Ghost-type a lot in regards to roster, but not so much in the move department. The only new ghost move added was Hex, which is a solid move if paired with a status move like Will-O-Wisp, but it wasn't super game-changing. But the new ghost-type Pokemon added were pretty freaking impressive. Gen 5 added a lot of really buff Pokemon overall. The new fully evolved ones added were Cofagrigus, Jellicent, Chandelure, and Golurk. With the exception of Golurk, which is unfortunate because I think Golurk is very cool. All 3 of them have had at least decent success in the competitive scene, either singles or doubles. Jellicent and Cofagrigus were mainly tanks, while Chandelure served as a brutally strong special attacker. The new ghost specialist was Chantal, a member of the Elite Four. The ghost type overall had been steadily improving over the course of the generations, and then Gen 6 came along and improved it quite a bit, mainly by adding some brutally powerful ghost types. But first, the type chart changed. This is the type chart starting in Gen 6 and still in place today. And the change here is subtle. Steel now no longer resists Ghost, which Ghosts certainly appreciated, especially in regards to their matchups against Steel Psychic types like Metagross and Bronzong. The changes Gen 6 brought by adding the Fairy type and making it so Steel no longer resisted Ghost made it so Ghost and Dragon are now tied for being the least resisted attacking types, both of them only being resisted by one type and not affecting one other type. I gotta hand it to the Ghost type. It really transformed from a type that was really barely there, and when it was for gimmicks, to a type that's in pretty high demand in the competitive scene thanks to its defensive immunities and the fact that its Ghost type attacks are not resisted by basically anything. There were only 2 new Ghost moves added in Gen 6, Trick or Treat and Phantom Force. Trick or Treat adds the Ghost type to the target, making it a pretty situational and gimmicky move, and Phantom Force is a weaker version of Giratina's Shadow Force, disappearing on the first turn, attacking on the second, but the target cannot protect. A pretty solid move, but by nature somewhat predictable. But as I mentioned, what was really impactful for the Ghost type was the new Pokemon. The new fully evolved Ghost Pokemon were Trevenant, Gourgeist, Aegislash, and Hoopa. Hoopa being the first Ghost type mythical Pokemon. Most of these didn't play a huge role, but Aegislash was unstoppable. Its ability to switch between incredible defenses and incredible offenses was so potent that it was on virtually everyone's competitive teams, at least in VGC. In Smogon, it got banned to Ubers. I used one in the 2014 Fall Houston Regionals I attended and got 25th or 24th out of like 250 people, so that was really cool. I used an Aegislash there. His name was Aegislash. It was great. Also, another Pokemon I didn't even mention because it's not fully evolved is Doublade. Doublade is a pretty solid Pokemon with the Eviolite boosting its defenses and its massive attack stat. It's not as good as Aegislash, but it's still pretty good. But Gen 6 didn't just add new species, it added Mega Evolutions. Mega Banette, Mega Sableye, and Mega Gengar were the 3 new Mega Ghost Pokemon. Mega Banette is unfortunately very bad. It's a strong Pokemon, but it's far weaker than almost every other Mega, meaning no one ever picks it. Mega Sableye is a bit better, but also not one of the best Megas. Mega Gengar, on the other hand, though, was incredibly powerful. It does lose Levitate and therefore has a ground weakness instead of a ground immunity, but it more than makes up for that. 130 base speed is incredibly difficult to outspeed, and you pair that with 170 base special attack means this thing can outspeed an Oko darn near anything. Plus on top of that, it had Shadow Tag as its ability, preventing Pokemon with a bad matchup from switching out. It was so overpowered that, like Aegislash, it was banned to Ubers. Gen 6 made Mega Gengar and Aegislash 2 ghost types that were so incredibly strong, they were put into Ubers despite not being legendary Pokemon. Actually, on the topic of Shadow Tag, Gen 6 made it so that Shadow Tag and all the other trapping abilities or moves like Arena Trap or Mean Look can no longer trap a ghost type. They can always flee or switch out. In fact, something that I learned while researching this video is that ghost type Pokemon can always run from wild battles, regardless of their speed stat, which is normally the determining factor. So that's interesting. Next came Generation 7, which added several ghost type things and overall benefited the type. Well, except for Gengar. Gengar lost its ability Levitate, so it went from having a ground immunity to a ground weakness, even in its not mega form. So they didn't like that. Still very good Pokemon though. Lots of new ghost type moves were added, but I'm not gonna go through all of them. I'll just show them here, since literally every single one of them is a signature move, a Z move, or a signature Z move. A lot of ghost type Pokemon were added though. The fully evolved ones being Alolan Marowak, Decidueye, being the first ghost starter, Oricorio Sensu style, Palisand, Mimikyu, Delmise, Lunala, Dawnwing's Necrozma, Marshadow, and Blacephalon. Of these, Mimikyu is the most noteworthy. It became a staple of competitive play thanks to its excellent disguise ability and very useful Ghost Fairy typing. Another Pokemon worthy of mentioning is Marshadow. First off, it's very cute. Who wouldn't like this little guy? But also because it is insanely good. It is a mythical, so that's to be taken into account, so it's not really seen in competitive formats. But in the ones it is allowed in, it is very good. Ghost and Fighting is a type attack combination that no Pokemon resists. Ghost Normal is the only type combo that does resist it, and a Ghost Normal Pokemon doesn't exist yet. So you combine its unresisted stab combo with its very good stats and its incredible signature move Spectral Thief, which steals the target's stat boosts, and you have an incredibly powerful Pokemon in an adorable package. I honestly wish this Pokemon was not mythical so I could use it on a playthrough team. The Ghost Specialist added was Acerola. Still not sure how to pronounce her name. The Trial Captain for the Ghost Trial, then later the Ghost Type Elite Four member. And then finally we reach present day, Generation 8. This didn't change a whole lot for the Ghost type, but it sure added some cool Ghost Pokemon. The new moves added were the Ghost Max move, G-Max Gengar's G-Max move, Shadow Rider Calyrex's signature move, Astral Barrage, and Poltergeist, yet another physical ghost move. I know I said that Ghost makes a lot more sense as a special type, which I still believe, but now that we've reached present day, there's quite a few more physical ghost moves than special ones, which I think is honestly kind of weird. It's like they made Shadow Ball special and they were like, yep, that's good enough for me. Now let's just add a butt ton of physical ones. The new ghost types added were Galarian Corsola, Cursula, Galarian Yamask, Runerigus, Sinistea, Poltegeist, the Dragapult line, Spectrier, and Shadow Rider Calyrex. Gengar also got a Gigantamax form, whose G-Max move, G-Max Terror, traps the target. Of the new Pokemon, Dragapult has made the biggest impact due to being the first Ghost-type pseudo-legendary Pokemon. Spectrier has also made a name for itself as well. Also, I want to mention that I think Cursula and Runerigus are very cool. I don't think they're that incredible and competitive, but I like them. However, despite all of the Ghost types added since the scarcity of them in Gens 1 and 2, to this day, Ghost remains the second rarest type, behind only Ice. Whether that's a good or bad thing depends on your opinions on the Ghost type, so I'm just sharing the info. The Ghost Specialist is Alistair, the gym leader in Stow-on-Side if you're playing Shield version. So in the end, the Ghost type transformed from a type that was very scarce and pretty gimmicky to a pretty respectably solid type, especially on the defensive side of things. But that concludes this video, so don't forget to pick up a little plushie of me, very limited time, link in the description below, and thanks so much for watching, with an extra special thanks to my patrons over on Patreon who are helping support my channel independent of fluctuating YouTube ad rates. If you wanna help support me in the same way, the link is in the description below. Also, if you wanna check out some more of my fun Pokemon content, they're all around the screen, like the plushie of me, which you should buy. All right, that's all we have for now, so until next time, we get hands. Gotta catch them all.